in this video, we are going to go over 10 things you should watch out for, or just 10 tips in general for cruising on Freeskates. So for number 10, we have common obstacles. That includes anything along the lines of accessibility bumps, manhole covers, a big unexpected crack, or up what you think is an accessibility ramp, but it has this big lip where it's really hard to get over on your skates. If it's like a really large one, you may have to slow all the way down and then get your feet on like the back edge of your skate. So instead of having it in the center, move it back so that that front wheel can hop up on the lip and roll over on both skates. Definitely make sure you're always, at least in your peripherals, looking at the ground at what's coming up in front of you so you can kind of gauge what to do next. In general, with any of these obstacles, if you do choose to go over, I think you should bend your knees a lot and keep your weight towards your back skate. And then last thing I'll say here is if you're out skating with a friend and you see that crack first, please say something because odds are they might not also see it.
Crack, crack, crack. Holy that crack was big and I couldn't see it until last second.
Tip number 9 has to do with rough terrain.
Oh, letters! Letters! Dude, we're on the letter road.
I did not expect the amount of rough brick and like the main stretch of this campus in front of the library. If you skate on this sort of terrain for any long period of time, your feet are going to start to feel sort of tingly or numb if you keep skating on that terrain, which is what we experienced. How to deal with this would be, again, bending your knees. All those vibrations are going to cause problems if your legs are stiff. Bend those knees to have some suspension and also keep your weight a little bit back and you should be okay. So this next part is all about different tips for slowing down. So this isn't quite about bombing hills yet. This is like slight hills or just riding on flat ground, and any situation where you need to slow down or hop off your skates, talk to a friend. Something I noticed while going over all this footage is that Jack will use like a multitude of different ways to slow down, kind of depending on the situation. If it's like a big, wide open path, he's gonna use big, wide carves to slow down very gradually. And if he needs to slow down more abruptly, he'll do these little mini carves to check his speed. Something else that he did a few times was reverse pumping, which admittedly is pretty advanced, but it does come in pretty clutch if you need to slow down in a straight line and you're not going like crazy fast down a hill. A couple other methods I saw him using to slow down were 360s as well as a 180 to just get a little bit of friction there to slow him down just enough to hop off the skates.
Yes, it works. You probably need some too. Yeah.
For any beginners out there, for slowing down, carving would be the big one. And even if you don't feel a lot of slowing down or friction being applied, just take that road or wherever you're riding really wide, and eventually you'll start to feel that friction and you'll be able to throw that back skate forward and start learning how to carve. For all these other techniques, reverse pumping, 180, 360s, as well as power sliding, something he also did. Those are all tutorials that exist on our channel. So this next section is about going down steeper hills. So there were some moments on campus where me and Jack were flying pretty fast. I'm obviously filming him on a camera, also riding on the Freeskates, and we're going fast down a hill. So when we're going at those speeds, we need ways to check our speed and make sure we're going at a manageable pace so that we don't eat it. Primarily what we were doing was taking big wide turns, but then also using our back skate for like little mini carves to constantly check speed so that we're not going blazingly fast. The one extreme example on this campus was the slithering snake. The terrain of this thing is kind of hard to describe. It was very smooth, not quite marble-like, but very slick. And that combined with the winding nature of it and the fact that it was very steep downhill. All that to say, know your limits and please don't hit anything like that unless you're going very slow and you really know what you're doing. The next part is going to be all about going uphill. So because this campus was decently hilly, there were a lot of moments where both Jack and I had to maneuver up a hill. For some of the stretches as the filmer, I would say I got decently tired, but I would say our energy was mostly conserved thanks to the style of pumping that we were using. So if you look at how Jack is handling these hills, he's not evenly pumping side to side symmetrically. He's doing what I would call a flow pump, which we talk about in a video that I'll link below. I would describe this technique as handling the hill in more of a zigzag fashion as opposed to trying to hit it head on. As the person filming, I will admit I did get a bit more tired than Jack did going up these hills holding that big camera, but it honestly wasn't that bad. Next up is water. For your safety and for the maintenance of your skates, I would just not recommend skating in anything that's going to get your bearings wet, but if it's just slightly wet ground, I would say there are fun ways to approach it, like this T-slide that Jack was doing. And I almost guarantee that right after Jack hit that little patch of water, he was being very conscious of the next few strides to make sure he's not going to slip up, essentially let your wheels dry out. Me personally, if there's ever a big puddle in my way and there's no way to really get through it dry, I'm going to slow down before I get to the puddle, step off, hop over the puddle, and then keep going, just because I don't want to deal with rusty bearings. Next up is navigating really tight spaces. On this campus, we had two versions of this. There were like these barriers that we had to kind of navigate through in combination with students. And then there was just in general passing hour where we needed to not hit any students and kind of navigate tightly through them. For this, I would say this is probably pretty difficult to do as a beginner, because if you're still learning how to turn sharply, it's going to be hard to maneuver. So some things you could try to learn how to turn are purchasing some slalom cones, just like little cones on Amazon or something, to give yourself something to kind of trail through. The budget version of that is just finding some leaves outside or some rocks to see how tight you can make them and still slalom in between them. You could also, I mean, right here I am sitting at Balboa Park, where there are a bunch of like tables lined up, and a lot of times beginners here, what they'll do is slalom in between those tables. That's a very wide slalom, but it's nice to practice turning tighter and tighter. For me, I just practiced this by doing, as I've said in another video. I went on campus and I learned the hard way by trying to navigate through students. The biggest thing I would recommend for you if you're just starting out is find ways to regularly practice tight turns and navigation so that you can make it through stuff like this. I think the next part of this goes without saying, but if it's like a really tight space, and especially if it's people, please stop pumping. Like, narrow your stance so that you're just riding straight and you don't have any sort of stride going, because that's just going to widen the area that you're impacting. So I would say stop pumping and then keep your arms by your side to take up the least amount of space possible. This next category is choosing the easier path, or just choosing the path that works for you. So like I said earlier, it's pretty important to always have your eyes on the terrain that's kind of immediately in front of you, but sometimes you're just going to have options. Something like pretty rough and pretty smooth, or something like rough next to something even rougher. Just by looking at it, you can kind of scope out where it's going to be the easiest path to go. A good example of this is when Jack was about to enter this bamboo garden, and he had the option of staying on pavement or rolling over, I think it was like this black mat thing. You don't quite know what's going to happen when you roll over something unexpected like that, so what Jack did was kept to the right and skated around it. And then another classic example of this is skating up or down accessibility ramps. What you could do is skate it diagonally so that you don't hit it at all, which is what Jack also chose to do. While this could be viewed as a practical tip to help keep you safe, I think it's also fun to remember that you have options.
Very smooth in like a lot of the parts, and then other parts are just like super bumpy. Maybe we try the street. Let's go down this way. Get some speed and hit this.
It can be fun to try and hit unexpected terrain and see how your skates handle it. It's a fun part of cruising around and just navigating in general. So this next part is going to be about unexpected challenges or unexpected bails. So the unfortunate part of free skating or skating in general is that you're going to have times where you run into an obstacle that you are not able to handle and you end up falling, or getting pretty close to falling. So one of the few examples that I was able to capture was when he hit this rock going at a considerable pace. This is a perfect example though of like the redundancy of the skates, where if you lose one skate, you can have the other skate save you. And then what I would recommend, if you lose one, just immediately put that foot down to drag to a safe stop and then retrieve the other skate. I think the reason Jack hit this is just because it was a small but impactful rock that he just did not see, and it ended up getting lodged in a wheel. Keep your weight at least centered and a little bit back. This is a common theme with a lot of these tips, but then also bend those knees, keep that suspension, and it's going to be a whole lot better for you than if you were to stay stiff like a stick. And then I could go into like the mechanics of how to fall correctly. Immediately from experience, I would say the main thing that's helped me is the moment I realize that I'm falling, I get my weight really low, bend my knees, and roll onto my side rather than extending my arms, because that's a good way to break something. This next part is less of a tip and more I just wanted to cover it in general. One of the most common questions we get about these skates is, how do they go up and down stairs and up and down curbs?
I could jump that stair set.
I would say for most people watching this, if you want to keep it practical, to be honest, what me and Jack do is we'll get off the skates and we'll put the skates in one hand and we'll walk up the steps or walk down the steps or step up the curb, step down the curb. If we're trying to be flashy with it, and I guess it depends on what your goals are, you could do a certain trick like a boneless. You could theoretically jump a whole stair set. But I think for most people riding these, that's not going to be what you're doing. And in my experience, and I would argue for Jack as well, we wouldn't call it inconvenient to have to use our feet for just a little bit so that we can set them back down at the end and keep going wherever it is we want to go.
But this looks like a really cool staircase. These someone would probably have like, he could do it, right?
That said, we do have tutorials for these sort of things like the boneless on our YouTube channel. But my favorite thing is just to use my feet. Cruising on these things has honestly been a blast for me and so many others out there. And I hope that this video maybe has inspired you to have some fun with it and do so in a safe manner. But if you like this video, feel free to check out this one right here. I think you'll like it. And yeah, thanks for watching.
Hi. You want to try?